3.5 million? I mean, just stop for a second and try to visualize that number. 3.5 million pages, photographs, scanned documents, files.
It's almost impossible.
It's this sheer overwhelming volume of material that the Department of Justice just dropped on the public about Jeffrey Epstein. And it sounds like an avalanche, right?
I think so.
You'd think, okay, that's it. Case closed, mystery solved. Everything we could possibly want to know is finally out there.
Logically, that amount of data should equal total transparency. It really does feel like it should be the end of the road. But the reality is it's infinitely more complicated.
Right.
Instead of a feeling of resolution, what we're actually seeing is confusion, frustration, and this very specific nagging feeling. It's not case closed.
It's more like, wait, what are we still missing?
Exactly.
And that is what we are unpacking today. We are doing a deep dive into this massive release of the Epstein files, but we're not just going to list what's in there, though some of it is pretty shocking. Yeah. We need to look at what's been held back because, spoiler alert, it's a staggering amount, and we need to understand the fallout. We're looking at reporting on the contents, the statements from DOJ officials, the pushback from Congress, and, the reactions from the victims themselves.
And our sources here are pretty comprehensive. We've got the raw numbers from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, legal analysis from victim attorneys like James Marsh, and then the very, very different political reactions from people like Ro Khanna to Donald Trump.
So our mission today is to sift through the noise. Because when you hear millions of pages, I think your eyes just glaze over.
It's a natural defense mechanism. Information overload.
It is. So we want to cut through that to figure out what has actually been revealed, why people are so furious about the redactions, and, the lingering questions about how a predator like this was empowered for so long.
Let's get into it. And I think we have to start with the numbers game because the controversy, it starts before you even read a single page. It really does. It starts with the math.
It absolutely does. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche came out to give the official breakdown, and the discrepancy he revealed is, well, it's the first major red flag for a lot of people.
Right.
He confirmed investigators found over 6 million files that were potentially responsive to this release.
Right. 6 million. So that's the total pool of data the government is sitting on. 6 million files that touch on the investigation, the network, the crimes, all of it.
But then, almost in the same breath, he clarifies that only 3.5 million have been cleared for public viewing.
Ah.
So if you do the quick math, that leaves about 2.5 million files that are just, not there.
They're in a government server somewhere, but we're not allowed to see them.
Yeah.
That's nearly half the total cache.
Exactly.
And that is precisely where the friction is. That gap, that 2.5 million file void, is the battleground.
Right.
Now, to be fair to the official stance, we have to look at how the DOJ is framing this. You have Attorney General Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche talking about this release as a massive win for transparency.
Their argument is that this is a comprehensive process designed to comply with the law while protecting privacy and, ongoing legal matters.
Blanche was very explicit about it. I think he said something like, quote, "We have nothing to hide."
He did. And he even said our doors are open if lawmakers want to come and review the materials. It sounds confident. It's the nothing to see here, look for yourself defense.
It is a strong procedural defense. They've promised to submit a report to Congress within 15 days that details the specific reasons for the redactions. So on paper, they're following the playbook.
They're saying, look, we gave you 3.5 million pages. That's unprecedented.
But if you look at the reaction from Congress, specifically from people like Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna, they are not buying the nothing to hide narrative at all.
Yeah.
They suspect that procedure is being used to mask, complicity.
Right, because Representative Massey seems convinced the redactions aren't just about protecting, innocent bystanders or victims' privacy.
His view is that the black bars are hiding co-conspirators.
He's basically saying if you helped Epstein, your name should be out there. There shouldn't be redactions covering the names of people who were part of that facilitation network.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Massey isn't just complaining in general. He is zeroing in on one specific set of documents that I think is the key to this whole mess. He's pointing to the 2007 draft indictment.
Okay, let's pause and unpack that, because 2007 is a long time ago. Why is that specific draft indictment the holy grail here? What makes a draft so special?
It all comes down to the timeline of justice, or injustice in this case. 2007 was before the infamous lenient plea deal that let Epstein escape serious federal charges.
The one where he was on a work release.
That's the one. These draft documents were what federal prosecutors had compiled when they were building the original heavy-hitting case. They contain the raw allegations, the evidence, and likely the names of co-conspirators before any political or legal maneuvering shut it all down.
I see. So the plea deal we all know about, the one everyone agrees was a travesty, that's the sanitized version of history. The 2007 draft indictment is the raw, unvarnished truth of what the government knew before they decided to fold.
Exactly. It's the blueprint of the case that never happened. It's the road not taken. Massey's argument is that if those files are redacted, we're missing the most critical piece. Who was in the crosshairs before the deal was cut?
Who were they looking at before someone said stop?
That's the question. And that's why both Khanna and Massey are saying they want to take Blanche up on his offer. They want a face-to-face meeting about what they call improperly redacted materials.
It creates this huge tension.
Yeah.
On one side, the DOJ says 3.5 million pages is transparency. On the other, skeptics are saying the 2.5 million you held back, and specifically what you held back in that 2007 file, is the actual story.
It feels like you're being given a haystack and told the needle is in the other barn.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of the haystack, let's talk about the breadcrumbs, as they're being called. We should pivot to what we actually got.
Yes.
Because I think people imagine a neat narrative like a book you can read through, but that is not what this is.
Not at all. It's a data dump in the most literal sense of the word. And from the reports, it is visceral. It's a mix of revealing exchanges, flight logs, messages, but also very graphic visual evidence.
Which is disturbing, but we have to acknowledge the reality of the crimes. The government actually had to take down some of the material from its website because it had inadvertently included nude pictures of girls.
That just stops you cold, doesn't it?
It does. We talk about files and redactions and politics, and it all becomes so abstract, like a spy novel.
Right.
But that error uploading images of victims drives home the reality. We're talking about the documented abuse of children.
Precisely. It strips away the intrigue and leaves you with the crime. It reminds us that these files are, in many ways, crime scene photos. Now, in terms of high-profile names, the release has definitely reignited the scrutiny on Prince Andrew, or Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as he's called in the legal text. The reporting indicates he appears in several of these new files.
And there was a specific visual detail reported that is just hard to shake. There are photos where he's seen, and the quote from the report describes him as kneeling over a female.
It's a specific disturbing image that adds a layer of reality to allegations that have been floating around for years. We've heard the stories. We remember the BBC interview.
Oh, yeah.
But visual evidence in a DOJ file, that just carries a different weight. It anchors the allegation in a kind of physical reality.
Yeah.
But this is where we run into what I'm calling the jigsaw puzzle problem.
The jigsaw puzzle problem. Break that down for me.
Well, imagine you have a 5,000-piece puzzle. You might have these shocking individual images, like the photo of Andrew, but if you dump all the pieces on the floor without the box cover...
Putting them together is a nightmare.
A nightmare. And this is a major point of contention from James Marsh.
Right. James Marsh is the attorney for many of the victims. You'd think he'd be thrilled with 3.5 million pages. That sounds like a lot of potential evidence.
You would think so. But his take is less about transparency and more about disorganization. Marsh has a forensics team literally poring over these millions of pages, and he criticized the release for lacking any context or order.
So it's just there.
It's just there. He said it's difficult to fit the puzzle pieces together because nothing is indexed, nothing is explained.
He used a great metaphor that stuck with me. He said the release wasn't the whole loaf of bread, it was just breadcrumbs.
And that distinction matters so much. Think about it. If I dump 3.5 million pages on your driveway, technically I've given you the information.
Sure.
But if it's disorganized, non-searchable, and lacks any connective narrative, is that true transparency? Or is it a data dump that actually hides the truth by overwhelming you? Marsh is suggesting that it's almost like burying the truth in facts.
It sounds almost like malicious compliance. You want the files? Fine. Here are all the files mixed up in a pile. Good luck.
That's it, exactly.
Speaking of timelines, though, I want to move to what I think is one of the most heartbreaking and infuriating revelations in this whole stack. We have to talk about Maria Farmer.
This is the part that just stops you in your tracks. If you take one thing away from this deep dive, it should be this timeline. It changes everything about how we view the failure of the justice system here.
So the documents confirm that Maria Farmer warned the FBI that Epstein possessed and distributed child pornography. And she did this in 1996.
1990. Six. Let's just sit with that date for a moment.
It's the mid-90s.
It's a full decade before the federal investigation we were just talking about, the 2007 one, was even launched. It's years before most of the known victims were even targeted.
A decade. A decade of abuse that could have been stopped cold. Farmer said she feels redeemed by the release because it finally proved she tried.
She wasn't silent.
She told the authorities. She did everything she was supposed to do.
Redeemed is such a powerful word there, because for years, victims like Farmer were gaslit. They were told they didn't speak up or they weren't clear enough. This proves she was right. But the flip side of her personal redemption is a systemic condemnation.
Absolutely.
Marsh and his legal team are looking at that 1996 date and asking the obvious question: why didn't federal investigators look into Epstein then?
The warning wasn't ambiguous. It was about child pornography. It wasn't some vague tip about weird behavior. It was a specific allegation of a federal crime.
It changes the texture of the whole story. It shifts the narrative from how did they catch him to why did they ignore him for so long?
And Marsh asked this really profound question that I think just echoes through all 3.5 million pages. Why was Epstein so empowered? Why was he so hard to resist?
And that question, why was he so empowered, that bridges us to the political and systemic fallout we're seeing right now. Because depending on who you listen to, the usefulness of this release is viewed very, very differently.
It's become a sort of Rorschach test, hasn't it, for how you view government corruption and priorities.
Yeah, the reactions are all over the map. You have former President Donald Trump, who weighed in on this, and his reaction was, well, skeptical is putting it mildly.
He called the effort to release these documents a waste of time.
Right. His exact quote was, frankly, the DOJ, I think, should just say we have other things to do.
Which, from his perspective, I suppose, the argument is that Epstein is dead, Maxwell is in prison, and digging through old files uses resources that should be on current issues. It's a pragmatic, look-forward argument.
It is. Why spend millions digging up the past when we have problems today?
But that stands in such stark contrast to someone like Ro Khanna or Thomas Massie, who see this as essential.
Completely different view.
Khanna's point is that you can't move forward until you excise the rot. For them, it's not a waste of time, it's a necessary cleansing. If you don't expose the powerful men who maintain these relationships, you leave the network intact.
For them, it's not about the past. It's about ensuring the future is clean. It highlights a fundamental disagreement about the purpose of government resources here. But I want to circle back to James Marsh, the victim's attorney, because he said something that I think cuts through the political noise and gets to the human limitation of this whole release.
What was that?
He acknowledged the limits of a paper trail. He said that documents alone, even 3.5 million of them, won't answer why Epstein was so empowered.
That makes so much sense, doesn't it? A document can tell you what happened. It can tell you a meeting took place on a Tuesday.
It can tell you a flight left at 3 p.m.
But it can't tell you the motivation. It can't tell you who was afraid of whom or who was being blackmailed in that room.
Exactly. A flight log doesn't explain silence. Marsh's quote was, "The humans that are writing the documents can answer those questions."
He's calling for something beyond the file dump.
He wants interviews. Specifically, he wants interviews with the former FBI agents who got that tip in 1996. He wants human accountability to fill in the gaps the papers can't.
That's a really crucial distinction. You can redact a name on paper. You can lose a file. But you can't redact a memory if you get someone under oath and ask them, why did you ignore Maria Farmer?
Or, who told you to drop the 2007 case? And that really seems to be the next frontier here. We have the breadcrumbs, as Marsh calls them. We have the disorganized puzzle pieces, but we don't have the full picture of the people who made the decisions to look the other way.
The documents are the evidence of the failure, but not the explanation for it.
That's it.
It really feels like we're in a holding pattern, even with all this information. We're drowning in data, but we're starving for answers. So let's try to synthesize this. Where does this leave us right now?
Well, let's look at the state of play. We have 3.5 million files. We have graphic evidence that confirms the severity of the crimes, no ambiguity there. And we have definitive proof that warnings were ignored as far back as 1996.
Which is huge.
It's a massive revelation about the FBI's timeline. But the why and the who else, especially regarding co-conspirators, that remains partially obscured by those 2.5 million redacted files and the chaotic release.
And we have some deadlines coming up that we need to watch, right? This isn't just going to fade away.
No, we need to keep a very close eye on that 15-day window for the DOJ's report to Congress explaining the redactions. That's going to be a major friction point.
If that report is vague or just full of boilerplate excuses.
Expect Congress to subpoena the unredacted files. That's when the real political fight will begin.
And there's also the potential release of grand jury material for Ghislaine Maxwell.
Correct. The Justice Department is seeking permission to release portions of that. Grand jury testimony is usually sealed tight. I mean, it's the holy of holies in the legal process.
Ooh, if that opens up.
It could provide a whole new avenue of information. Potentially the human testimony Marsh is looking for. That's where you might hear people actually talking about why they did what they did.
So this deep dive really isn't over. It's just the first chapter of this specific release.
Absolutely. And I think the thought to leave with is really Marsh's point about the difference between files and accountability. We can drown in data, we can have millions of pages, but if the release is disorganized, if it's a puzzle with pieces missing, who's actually responsible for putting it together?
That's the heavy lift, isn't it? History is moving on. The news cycle moves on. If the documents are just a disorganized mess, it requires so much human effort and political will to stop and say, no, we are going to piece this together before we walk away.
Because if we don't, the breadcrumbs just get swept away. And that decade of silence between 1996 and 2006, it just happens again. If we don't understand the mechanism of the failure, we are doomed to repeat it.
A sobering thought to end on, but a really important one. We'll be tracking that DOJ report, and we will likely be back to unpack whatever is in those grand jury files. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.